Their focus is mainly on India's own strategic equities and also on its economic growth trajectory. They want investment, they want technology transfer, they want upskilling, and they want sustainable long-term investments in India. And to the extent that Trump administration is able to facilitate that, I think that will be very welcome both by Mr. Modi and by his coalition, by a broad spectrum of business interests in India. The challenge, I think, is that in some of the high growth areas in the relationship, for example, the so-called initiative on critical and emerging technologies, where India has looked to the United States to open the floodgates on technology transfer and sharing in areas like space or artificial intelligence or biotechnology or nanotechnology or other critical and emerging areas. There are people on the Trump team who really want to keep those technologies closer to home. That's not really the Modi government's objective. And so I think navigating that is going to be a big part of the strategic conversation between the United States and India. And then there's also the larger set of questions, which is that India is not particularly interested in taking a side in global geopolitics. A few years ago, Mr. Jaishankar, the external affairs minister, was asked whose side India was on. And he responded by saying that India had chosen a side, it had chosen its own side. And so India is looking for a diverse set of partnerships with a variety of partners. That includes Russia. They appear to be improving their relationship with China, although within obvious limits and constraints. And so that'll create some challenges to navigate with the Trump administration as well.
You know, Evan, you were talking about India wanting technology transfer from the U.S. In critical areas, including space, but even much sort of lower level, lower altitude, if you want to call it that. And we've talked about this before. It's, you know, basically how to make fighter jet engines, right? Which leads me to my next question. I'm wondering, I get the sense, and correct me if I'm wrong or if you have a different view, right, that what is getting sort of bipartisan support is this whole focus on rejuvenating, re-energizing, and building back out the U.S. defense industrial base, right? Now, I'm wondering how much of a role India might have in that.
Well, I think that debate really begins with a domestic debate in the United States. First, there's a debate among the strategic class, of which I'm a card-carrying member as a former U.S. national security official, about pressure on the American defense industrial base generally, particularly in the context of needs for potential warfighting with China in a Taiwan contingency. Transfers to Ukraine and other factors have put a lot of pressure on U.S. supply, on U.S. munitions, and so on. Second, there's a longer-term question about integrating the industrial base with the technology industrial base. A lot of the emerging and foundational technologies that are critical to defense and to weapon systems are also dual use or multiple use in nature. This includes AI-enabled applications, new synthetic and composite materials, and so on, and also dependence on inputs, including raw materials and critical materials from, you guessed it, China. So that debate is going to play out as well. Then there's this question about dealing with allies and partners. What are the right kinds of allied and partnership agreements around technology sharing and defense industrial development? Japan, South Korea, Australia through the so-called AUKUS agreement, and also India, where the defense industrial and technology relationship bilaterally has grown a lot, are obviously enthusiastic about that. But there are a lot of issues around technology transfers, export controls, technology sharing, and also, frankly, those countries' relationships with China, because the trajectory in the U.S. debate about China has been to securitize everything. Capital flow to China, technology flow to China, knowledge flow to China, data flow to China is viewed in the United States, but not necessarily everywhere else, as a national security matter. And then second, the U.S. trying to extraterritorialize its export controls by coercing third parties to not collaborate with China. So that will put some intrinsic brakes and limits on the relationship, not so much with India, but potentially with Korea and even with Japan and others as well. We've already seen the U.S. apply export controls, for instance, to TSMC and to Taiwanese companies that wanted to continue working with subsidiaries of Huawei. This happened a few years ago, but I don't think that kind of pressure and impulse is going to go away, and that'll create some scratchiness too.